photos on Gimbalabs. Here we go. All right. Hey, everybody. It's the 25th of July, 2023. It's Tuesday, 1800 UTC, which, as you can see on my screen right here, we've been running a weekly, most weeks, meeting for the last few weeks called Gimbalabs Carnival. And it's just a chance to get together and figure out how to build stuff in public. I had the privilege of hosting a SIP 1694 workshop here in my hometown in central Massachusetts, USA, back in May. And Kyle, who's one of my first friends I made in the Cardano ecosystem, came out to visit. We played some disc golf. Finally, he beat me both times, but I felt good with my performance. And we had the workshop, and the day after the workshop had a really compelling idea jam. Kyle, did you sleep that night in between the workshop and Friday morning?
Very little.
It was pretty
some late nights. Yeah.
But I think this generalizes, for me, every Voltaire event I've participated in so far has, at least at some point, become a chance to think about how identity works and how important it is for issues of decision making. And so, without rehashing all of that right now, it was thrilling to hear that I wasn't alone in that experience of noticing that. And Kyle, just the way you kind of took a few ideas and ran with them was really exciting. So we've had a couple of calls since then where you've given me a little preview of what we're working on. But I'm really excited today to kind of hear it straight from you, see what you've been building, and most importantly, to hear kind of what kind of questions and ideas it gets up from the group of us here. Any high-level questions from anybody about how Carnival works? All right, we're all about learning by doing, so you're about to see what it's all about. Check out the website here at Gimbalabs where you can see these details. I'll drop this into the chat. And if you have any questions, follow up anytime, Gimbalabs Discord or Twitter or anywhere else. Without further ado, let me stop sharing and hand it off to Kyle. Hey.
How's it going? Okay. So I don't actually remember what the title of this talk was, but I think we'll get it from all the material that I'm going to cover. I'll start with a really simple slideshow just so we can kind of talk about terms, and I want to make sure everyone understands when I say things like DIDs, what is a DID really? What's a DID document? Things like that. We will first start with a demo app that I actually presented to my company, trying to illustrate these ideas and how you use them and how they can be leveraged and why they are powerful. Past that, I built further a mobile app and a separate website that we can demonstrate DID off. More specifically, we can really look at what it means to resolve a DID and gather the DID document and why you would do that. What's the purpose of that? So yeah, let's dive in. Okay, everybody see the pretty little slideshow we got here?
Looks good.
All right. Centralized identity, controlling your identity. Ultimately, we talk a little bit about problems, which ultimately boils down why. The big thing really is identity providers. It's kind of like why we do this, or why this is important to do. A little bit over how we can use decentralized identity to solve the problems. Talk a little bit about what DIDs are, and we'll touch on verifiable credentials, even though this really isn't, we're not going to cover that stuff, but I can definitely answer questions if anybody wants to dive into that after. Problems with current identity providers. Ultimately, right, they hold your data. They are subject to breaches. They're online, and it's not just their systems that you have to trust, but it's also the people who work there, right? Because one of the biggest problems with hacking is actual social engineering. So it's not always, or even probably a lot of the times, network security or software security. It's really just like simple things like phishing emails. The identity is not portable, which I think is a really good one. When your identity is portable, right, you have a little bit more control over how the data is shared and how it's presented. This is a big one, right? When someone else holds your data, they can make copies of it without you knowing, right? They can share it, they can give it to whoever they want. I think the biggest one is with Facebook, right? They had their whole profile API. People were really exploiting that back in 2016 elections, I think, and just oversharing, right? Whether that's kind of like the Facebook problem. Ultimately, becoming your own identity provider, and this is to me the biggest one, and I'll try my best to illustrate this when we get to the final demo. Is being your own identity provider. You get to make the decisions as to who gets to see your data. You're the one that's going to be sharing your data, and you have a lot more control over how you exercise that ability. Yeah, we're not worried about the rest. Okay, so DID, right? So I'm sure everyone's heard the term DID. To be clear, it stands for decentralized identifiers. So not digital identity, not decentralized identity. It's an identifier. More specifically, it needs to be globally unique. And when I say globally unique, I don't mean the whole thing. What I mean is the third part of the DID, or at least let's just say the third plus whatever there might be attached to it. So a DID is made up of 3 parts. The base schema of DID itself, right? So it's always DID. The second part is method, and this is where the part of when it can be unique starts really identifying itself. In my demo, I'll show you 2 specific methods, which one is web and the other one is GitHub. Neither of these methods involve the blockchain. And in fact, nothing I'm going to demo today involves the blockchain. Because I mainly want to focus on the concepts of what we're talking about and not so much getting buried into how blockchain is leveraged here. Think of this more of a framework or platform, and you can essentially add whatever methods, which could be any type of blockchain type of implementation, to this framework. Verifiable credentials. So credentials are not things that are stored on the blockchain. Can I go back easily? Okay, let me just talk what is actually stored decentralized. When you make a DID, you are going to make documents based off these DIDs, and the DID documents themselves are what are actually stored, because they don't have any type of PI, right? Personal information. It's really just on ways of verifying and resolving identity or signatures or any type of actions that are taking place inside the workflow of, like, for instance, trying to share credentials, or even just something as simple as authentication. So verifiable credentials are going to have PI in them potentially, right? They could have your name. It could have even more sensitive information like medical records or something. And these are things that are not stored on the chain. They are stored in like wallets or some type of piece of software, really, that you would then be able to share as according to your discretion. I think, okay, let's not let me go any further. So we're going to say that's it. All right, so here is the first demo, and the reason why I want to start.
Kyle, is it okay if we pause for questions real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
I saw that Roar had a hand up.
Yeah, okay. I'm just wondering, this is for people, but have you also looked into how you can adapt this to, for example, companies?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of the examples that me and my colleagues talk about are more for internal use of companies and not really even something that should or can be publicly exposed. So it could be something as simple as employee badges or credentials or things like that. But when I say people, yeah, you can interchange that with companies. Like organizations can have DIDs.
Cool.
I mean, not even it could even just be like a piece of software, like an IoT can have an identifier itself, right? And it can have its own private keys that it can act on and interact with the network of whatever network you're implementing this on. I think it's
Yeah.
just easier to speak in people. But yeah, anything can have can own things. Yeah, so a verifiable credential could even just be like an access token, right? So an IoT may need to access a particular network, and it might be done through an access token that you might use some type of credential for. As a consultant, right, I sometimes get like temporary like contractor type logins to secure systems. One like that could be one, right? Like collaboration type between companies. So absolutely.
And we've
Okay.
got quiz real quick.
Oh,
No, man, I'll pass, guys. Go ahead. I'll come back to it.
all right. So this particular example only has 2 actors. Typically, you probably see a 3-actor example where you have a holder, which is a person or anyone who has like a DID or just really keys that we're talking about. An issuer, which issuer is the actor that's going to be creating credentials and issuing those credentials out, and then a verifier. The reason why we go with verifier here is I'm really just going to be focused around DID authentication, and the reason why is this the simplest example to illustrate the mechanic of using a DID document and how the DID document actually can validate you as an identifier or like your DID, right? And I'm going to probably lean on just using DIDs because there is a paradigm or like some type of practice where you try to use a DID like for one thing. So it's not out of the realm of like best practice for people to have the stance of saying one DID almost per action. You want to log into one particular type of like website, you're going to use a unique DID for every site, right? I think it's like one password per site. Like that's the common like advisable practice, right? Like don't use the same password for every website, don't use the same DID for every website. But you can still nest your ownership of DIDs, and I'll show a little bit of that actually as well. Okay, so we'll start with the holder. We can kind of start wherever, but we'll just start here. Okay, so we have a holder. When I created this holder, it just generated a new DID, which is just generating a random key pair. We can see the key pairs here. It's just the hex code for it. I am using my library Cardano Sharp for all the cryptography here. So even though I'm not doing anything Cardano related, I'm still able to leverage a lot of the same algorithms that we use for Cardano. The other thing is it's common in this space to use base 58. So I will be using base 58 encoding instead of like the common BEC32 encoding. So this right here actually is just a BEC encoding, I believe, of the public key. So what I'll do though, right? So we're going to say like this DID represents the holder. So I'm going to create an auth DID, and we can see that it is different, and we have another unique key pair for it. And here's the DID document. This is what we would store. Depending on the DID method, we would store it accordingly. B2I is not a DID method. It's completely just arbitrary for this demo. So, I mean, we're not going to store this. Everything that is generated, looked up, created, verified, all that stuff is all in memory. So as soon as I shut down the program, everything gets wiped. But this is what you might think of a typical DID document that is leveraged for authentication. Now, note that, never mind, we'll get to it. So the ID is the actual DID. So I know we can't see the ending here, but we can see that this, is this too small? I can maybe make this bigger.
Very good, thank you.
Okay.
No, that's great.
I'm gonna zoom it out just for UI purpose. It's gonna get weird. But we can see, I guess we can't really see, but the ID here is the DID of the auth DID. The controller, so the parent, basically the entity that has controlling authority over this particular DID, is the main holder DID. And we can see that right there. Past that, we have authentication. This is really telling us the types of authentication that this DID document can help facilitate. And we can see that we have one particular algorithm specified here. And what we have really right here is what we call an authentication method. In this particular point, it's really just an identifier. Key one, we can see that's actually right here. So if there were multiple on the list, this would probably be more evidence why it's useful, but it's really just saying, hey, go look at the private key in the private key list, and here's the the public key that we need to look up, and hence why it's the ID on this object. Once again, it's just telling us the algorithm, the owner, which it's just this DID, but more importantly, it's the Beck 58 encoded public key, and that's useful, and we'll get to it later, but I just want to show you what the DID document looks like. All right, so before we can even sign a request, we got to go get a request. So let's create a verifier. Please stop me at any point. I'm just going to walk through this. It is a lot. So same exact stuff. I'm not going to go through it, but just note I created auth-did for the verifier. Here's the document, and we'll see why we did that in a second. So what I'm going to do is create a request. So this is a DID auth request. Okay, we can view it. The controller is the verifier DID. The query, ultimately, it's just stating the purpose of like what we're trying to request, which is a DID authentication, and the challenge. So the challenge is what needs to be signed by the person providing the response. The reason why we needed an auth-did is because in this particular example, the verifier is going to sign the request. This could be, this is almost an optional thing, but it's still a security mechanism, right? Because you want to verify that the people asking information of you are in fact who they say they are, right? You don't want to accidentally provide a response. Like, let's say somebody was trying to ask for like any type of PI, like HIPAA, compliance, FISMA type stuff. Very sensitive information that you want to make sure that you are actually giving it to the person that you think you're giving it to, even if it seems secure. Okay, so let's copy this, and we're going to go back to the holder. This holder is going to provide a response. And we can see the challenge there. We can also see it in here. So this is the auth response. Again, the controller is the holder itself. The type is a verifiable presentation. In DID auth, even though the request isn't a verifiable credential, it is common practice to provide the same schema for a verifiable presentation, which when people ask VCs for you, you typically provide a VP, which is a little more complicated of a model, but it has all the proofs for who issued it to you and your proof as well. So let's just talk about the important parts here. So we as a holder, we sign this request, and the request, what we specifically signed was the challenge. That's why that's important. So that would be something unique every time, right? A GUID. So this proof value is the signature. It is base 58 encoded signature of the challenge. So the private key of my auth-did signed the challenge, and we have a value here. Now the verification method, right? Because when we give it back to the verifier wants to go and get the did document and get the public key so they can verify that that the owner of these keys and the identifier, so the did, are the same people. And that's what the verification method is going to allow the verifier to do. They'll go and get the document. They will then produce the message, which is the challenge. They'll take the signature, and with the signature, the public key, and the message, they can then verify that I did in fact sign it. So we'll copy this, go back to the verifier, provide the. All right, so in fact, hopefully reviewing code is not going to be too in the weeds, because some of the stuff is very hard to illustrate or really like prove the mechanics if I can't show you what it's doing. And in fact, this is like probably a lot higher level of an example. When we get into more like the mobile app with the separate software, we'll properly resolve a did that's hosted on the internet, and you'll see how it downloads it and it actually can extract out the public key. And because like I said, right now, this is all in memory. It's just the same program. It's able to access documents and stuff. But we can see the request coming in. Ultimately, we can see right here, I just have a comment, like this is not true. This is not a resolver. So in the real example, we'll actually resolve something here. This is just, like I said, looking up a in-memory list for a particular did document. And from here, right, so we were able to find the did document. So this is what we originally saw on one of the first pop-ups where it had authentication. This is really small, I apologize. And then the public key, which more importantly, right, we're talking about this base 58 encoded public key, but it's going to use the verification method, right? So the verification method is the did hashtag key -1, right? That's the ID of the particular public key we want to see. And that's what was on the proof of the response. But it's also the ID on my did document that's supposed to be hosted on the internet or some way that's resolved, right? So I didn't provide the public key, but I provided a way for you to, one, resolve the document, and two, to identify what public key I want you to use. Because remember, the did identifier, it's called an identifier because you should be able to resolve and identify the document that is associated with the did itself, right? So the fact that I followed a specification and then I gave you my unique identifier. So dids, one, have specs that they follow on how you resolve documents, and two, they're globally unique. So you can't have conflicts there, right? But ultimately, this line that we're on right now, it's just going to use that verification method on the document to figure out what public key we actually want to use. We found the public key. We're making that message, right? We're just turning the challenge into a byte array, and we're doing the standard asymmetric cryptography thing of sign verify. Now we're about to verify. Using the public key, the message, and the signature. Those are the three things you need to verify a signature. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but it's true, right? But I mean, in this particular example, it's going to be a little weird. But the response is valid, right? And we kind of knew that. We used the same actors. It was very simple. In the real example, I can actually show how that's not going to be the case. But yeah, okay, so this is definitely a time to ask questions. Since that was very high level, I know it sounds high level, didn't seem necessarily high level. But the next example is hopefully you'll see a picture or some type of view into a world where it seems a little more applicable. And I can just move on to that if you guys are ready for that. Okay, we'll just do that.
What are we doing?
So I'm going to demonstrate using an identity wallet and authenticating into some random site that is using an authentication method using decentralized identity. Specifically supporting the did methods of web and GitHub. So there's a bunch of, so like for instance, when we talk
Not your
about
B to, not the B to I, but
no,
web
no.
and GitHub.
So that
Okay, great.
I is
Okay.
is just for demo purposes. When we talk about Atala Prism, right? We are specifically talking about a did method specification, and that's all you're talking about. You're not talking about some weird new flavor of identity. They follow all the same stuff. If you want to read Prism, the did it's on the W3C website. You can go read the specification. You don't need to talk to IOHK. You don't need to go read some GitHub on how to implement some Prism compatible wallet. You don't need to talk to them, right? It's all out there for you to read and implement your own identity wallet using the Prism specification. And I'll link to that in a second if you guys want to see it. Okay. All right, so I have the wallet up, the wallet's running, and in fact, we're not going to we'll stick on the wallet for a second. Just to show the difference between the site that will eventually pop up, which is this, and we can see it's broken because I'm not running API. Perfect, right? Okay, personal GitHub. And right here, so this is my personal GitHub did document that I created using this particular identity wallet. We can see that the did is did GitHub, nothing like being my GitHub username. In fact, so there's some weird things with GitHub, but it's not even worth me verifying it here because it's not gonna help anything. Copying the document just gives me what I have right here. But what we'll do, I have a domain and we'll use the web specification. So I'm going to create a document or a did and put the document up. And I can show you how it verifies and fails, and we'll actually see it.
So this is just public JSON LD. You can see the URL. Can you drop that URL in the chat, Kyle, just so people can see, right? Like this is just some data on the web, freely available.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to create a web did using the wallet. I'm not going to create a new key, but just to kind of illustrate, these keys are using mnemonics, just like everyone else I'm sure here is familiar with. At the moment, I'm just creating keys. Implementing restore, can definitely be done. I'll select the main one. So I have different did types. Did type is a weird term, but the point here is to think about what I said before, right? Like one did per action almost, right? Like your did should be almost like unique passwords. So the intention of why you're creating the did matters, right? Intention matters. So if you have a Cardano staking address, don't get me wrong, I'm sure we all have multiple wallets, but like, let's say you have your main staking wallet, right? You may want to prove that you own that stake address, right? So that can absolutely be done with using identity workflows, right? And when we do the did auth stuff, you might actually understand a little bit more what I mean by that, on how you could use your did keys to prove that you own said staking address. Same with payment keys, and more specifically why payment keys might be useful is anything around mangled addresses or Franken addresses, right? It's like, doesn't matter if you own the stake key, because when you store UTXOs, it's not actually on your stake keys, right? It's on your payment keys, and anybody can put their payment key on your stake key, and then voila, depending on how whatever software you're using looks up your UTXOs, it may look like you own something, but you don't, because you don't have the keys to move the funds. All right. Anyway, right now I don't have, like I said, I don't have anything using Cardano, the blockchain. So we're going to stick with simple, but this is coming, and between Sidetree Cardano, which is a fork of the Microsoft Ion project. Sidetree is really good. Which Sidetree, at least from the Microsoft standpoint of Project Ion, uses Bitcoin. But I believe it's one of the founders of Root ID. He
Yeah,
forked it. and-
Rodolfo did it.
yeah, he came up with the Cardano implementation. So that Atala, and I mean, ultimately, as long as the specification is defined and other people can, resolve your method, I think there's reasons to use all kinds of methods. So, but we'll just go with simple. And like I said, I have a website, one disc golf, so we'll call it that. We're gonna use web.
Is that wallet you're using, Kyle, available for other people?
Not yet.
Tease.
This is the first look.
Actually, yes, it is.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
All right.
Yeah,
Not
I've seen it, I think.
even people in. I don't even think people in my company have. I don't think I've demoed the other site to them, but I haven't demoed this quite yet. Okay. Before I do anymore. Okay, so this is what a web did looks like. It ultimately is did web and then the domain. In the specification, you can have extensions to those domains. And ultimately what it's really doing is just going to take each like slug slash, right, the path, and it just converts them to more colons. So you could definitely see like some service where somebody's providing web dids where it's like, I'll just give an extension off my website and you get a unique did type thing. Information about it, it was a simple, it really doesn't matter. A lot of this stuff is just for me to see as I'm developing, like the key, the index derivation, right? So even though I'm using a key, I'm really still deriving new child keys off of that key. That being said, I'm not using like the SIP 1854 2, whatever.
That was 200 off.
So-
That's good, man.
Yeah. But this is like some different derivation path stuff. But what I can do, okay, now here's the thing. Clearly I've been developing this for a while. So actually, if you go to my website, and this is following the did spec, when you host a did, you need to put it into the root path .well-known/did.json. Ultimately it's always called did.json, but if you have the slashes, right, it's just whatever the path is.
And wait, the dot well known part, that's a standard at this point.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Give me 1 second. And
I've seen that. Dot well known in my hosting. No idea what it was.
yeah, there's other stuff that gets stored there, for sure. But, I mean, this is through like Bluehost, and they have some stuff in there.
Exactly.
which is-
That's mine.
yeah. When I went there, I was like, oh wow, I don't have to make that directory. Okay, so what we're gonna do is here. So I have a did document here, right? But I just made the did. So what we'll do is I'm going to verify the document. It failed, right? Which makes sense because I didn't host. This is from an old public and private keys. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy the document and I'm going to update the document, which clearly doesn't look any different other than probably the one thing. So the only thing I really should change is this public key right there, line 18. So now if I verify, it's successful, right? And since it's internally doing this, it seems kind of weird. But ultimately it's just has an arbitrary message. It goes out and fetches the document based on the type of did method it is. And we'll walk through that a little bit when I actually start up the other site. And we'll see it, figure out what it's actually how it's trying to resolve the did, watch it download the document, and actually use something that it actually pulled from outside the system instead of something that it already had. Which, 1 second, let me just go through my notes, make sure I'm covering what I want to talk about.
So the did is public, anybody can see it. And there's a public key there, just like there's a public key represented in every UTXO that's spendable on a blockchain.
exactly.
It's all out there. And you're saying, all right, well, let me verify that I'm the one who holds the public key related to this public, or sorry,
Private
I
key.
have the private key related to this public document.
Yeah.
And so once that's validated, then we can move from there. And it is similar, right? On the blockchain, if I have that private key, I can spend that UTXO.
Yeah. I think the hard part right now might be to understand like why that's important, how that's powerful, like, because it's like, you know, it's one of those things where like, you know, it's like you can learn to program, but until you're like faced with like a real problem or like something that somebody's asking you to build, like sometimes it feels really arbitrary to like write lines of code, right? It's like when I was like, oh, I'm gonna go learn a language. It's like, but the first question you always ask yourself is like, well, what am I gonna write, right? It's like, because you need some type of problem, like you need something to like put, well, bytes on a screen. So it's like, so even when I'm doing all this, it might seem like really arbitrary. It's like, okay, cool, you're just doing verify sign. It gets different when, like, let's say, you know, we're past registration, and instead of has anyone here worked with like OAuth or dealing with like integrations where you have to like understand a user of a different system? You know, just like in, let's say if you build something, right, like you have a user table like in a database, and it has like a integer that represents the ID of that user. So when you are relating information to that user, like user one, you're going to throw user ID 1 on all your records that relate back to that user, right? So you can understand who owns this record in my system. Well, imagine instead of it being a 1, it's a did, right? Because now when I log in, you don't have to, it's not like, it's globally unique. So the fact when I give you my did, that is now your user identifier. So, and you'll see I'm putting the did in a JWT. So when I give you my session, you're gonna be like, oh, okay, that's the you know, that's the user that I'm talking to. Let me go see who, like, what information this did has in my system, right? So, and that's why it's powerful, right? Because like just look at the screen right here. Like I entered a password, right? I entered a password on my identity wallet. Instead of entering a password into Google for Google to give you my identity, I'm going to enter a password to unlock my private keys so I can basically sign on behalf of this did, right? Now, let's go a little bit farther with this into the world of verifiable credentials, right? Because when you get credentials, and it could be something like KYC related, where it's like, hey, I just want my, let's say, okay, so I live in Ohio. So let's say the state of Ohio is going to come out with verified IDs, driver's licenses, right? And they give me, they're like, hey, download this identity wallet and then scan this QR code, and you're going to fill out a form, and we're, you know, you give me your ID and all this stuff. And they're going to give you back a credential. That credential will be tied to this did, right? So that means that when I present those credentials, I'm going to use this did, this key pair, to sign on behalf of my ID. So the did isn't arbitrary anymore, right? It actually has information that it can be tied to the key pair. So when I need to present it, right? Let's say I'm going to a bar and somebody needs to know, like, hey, are you over 21? And it's like, hey, scan this Ohio verified ID thing, right? I whip out the identity wallet, I scan it, and I'm using a did that was basically given the ownership of those credentials. And I sign it and I present those credentials through whatever software, right? And now the did, where it's not just arbitrary key pairs, is actually able to unlock and verify and provide, for instance, like that verified presentation JSON, that same type of payload is actually what would be presented. And they resolve it through some Ohio system, right? For getting the did document. Hopefully the picture is getting painted a little clearer here. I've been like researching this stuff for years now, and I'm still like constantly having to like draw it
Hey,
out on
Kyle.
whiteboards and stuff. So
Since you're in Ohio, man, and Ohio's a monopolistic state for workers' comp, I could see Potential use case of integration there,
Yeah, sure.
but yeah,
Yeah, they're very they're monopoly on a lot of things for sure. It's a big boys club here. Don't get me
Kyle.
started on alcohol. So
well, that's totally different. Workers' comp with a monopolistic state means that it's provided by the state, not
yeah.
shitbag
Anyway.
insurance companies.
Um
Kyle,
yes.
can you go over the bit about your did document is also hosted publicly, but in that bar entry scenario,
Mhm.
who's controlling the did document and where?
So I still would be controlling. Okay, so let's say it was even using web, right? And here, let's pull it back up. So instead of it being like one disk off, let's say it was like ohio.gov, right? And let's say they gave me some unique identifier, right? And then it was did.json, right? So this random identifier, right? It would be like did web ohio.gov : then my random identifier. So like whatever the wallet software, it would generate the did. It would have the key pairs, and essentially I would have some password or even biometric, right? Like you could use your face or a thumbprint or something like that. Whether or not you should is a completely different topic. But the right way of doing it is like my key pair would be on my device, and then that's where it would not be on their website or anything like that. They might host the document, which is fine, right? The document, as long as it's resolvable, can be hosted wherever. That's not a compromising thing. It's the private keys. The private keys you need to control the private keys, or you don't control your identity. It's the same notion of not your keys, not your crypto.
Mm-hmm. And the document contains the context of that verification scenario. So
yep,
you know, different did document for entering a bar from in Ohio to proving your driving license in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too, right? It could work anywhere, as long as the support is there, because the did itself is telling you how to get the document. That's the important part, right? Like I should be able to give as long as you understand it, right, and you understand how to resolve the specification, which for web it really is just right. Okay, like for instance, the second one is web, and that is telling you the way you resolve this did, and this information is unique to the method. So as long as you know, for instance, based off that W3C website I shared, you know that's like, okay, www.onediscoff.com/.wellknown/did.json is where the document is. So like for instance, that .wellknown/ that's in the spec. Like, I didn't make that up, right? I'm implementing what I'm following basically. So even if I went to like Michigan or something and they have the same system, even if my document's stored on some Ohio website, that's fine because it's still following the same standard and they'll know how to resolve it. So that's kind of like what I was I was trying to allude to the fact that like someone could start a service that hosted web dids, right? And it's like there's a very interesting question that I still grapple with today in this system of decentralized identity is who pays for it? I hate that question because it's a very hard one to answer, right? It's like, I don't know. I have,
Babel
depending
fees.
on what you're doing with it, I can provide answers, but
Isn't it just a hosting provider, the same as a two-factor authenticator? You don't pay for the service, but you use it. So
yeah. So for instance, I have a website, I got to pay for the website, right? So, but what if it's using like blockchain? So let's say I want to store this on blockchain. I'm going to pay somebody somewhere, even if I set the system up myself, I'm going to pay network fees, right? But as a resolver, you have to have some type of system that will be able to resolve the did, right? So even though the did is going to tell you how to resolve it, specifically, let's say it's some Cardano implementation, I'd either need to run a node and run all the systems in order to get metadata off the node from some UTXO, or play block frost, or probably implement my own Koios because of, let's say, demand or something like that. So like there's definitely costs to that are there. And it's not as simple as like, hey, Google will just give you the information, right? Like, you know, you pay Google in other ways, which is basically by letting them have your data. But.
And so, I mean, just, I'm not sure how familiar everybody here is, for example, with the full loop of how Web 2 authentication works, right? But at the end of the day, you still end up with a token essentially in your web browser that then allows you access to things after you log in, right? So I go to a website, type my username and password, that gets sent across the internet where it's validated on some server, and then sent back to me is the token that now allows me access. This is just skipping that step, essentially, right? I'm validating that I have this credential locally. But Kyle, am I right to think that if I see this verification successful message, one result of that could be that now I have something like a JSON authentication token that allows me access to anything else?
We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
Sorry, I think your explanation was correct. I think just what this is doing doesn't really follow it, unfortunately.
Okay.
This was really just to let's say like this was actually in a real identity wallet. Like I don't even know if I would put this in like let's say like production. It's really just to ensure that you hosted it correctly. That like I gave you the document, you go put it where you think you're supposed to put it, and you can use this mechanism to basically prove like, yes, you did it correctly. Now, clearly, let's say it was using something like Ion or even let's say like Prism, you would not need to copy the document, right? Because that's not the point. Like there should be some other mechanic where you're more or less hitting the button like store, and then it presents like some type of transaction to you where it's like it's going to cost this, you know, whatever money. And maybe it shows you the document in like metadata form, and then you hit, you know, submit, and you're waiting for it, and it's like, okay, transaction whatever has your did document on it, something along those lines. But what you just said, we're about to see that part. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think we're basically just ready. All right. Just you guys are gonna go for a ride. Sorry, I gotta use my webcam. Okay. I'll make sure it's like not looking at the QR code at the moment. Oh god, okay. Oh, it doesn't like what I'm trying to do. Okay, hold on one second. I might have to.
Very nice.
Yeah, I think it's Zoom, I think, is like taking control. So 1 second. Yeah, there we go. You guys can still see, right? Like you can see like my coffee and stuff. Okay, cool.
Yeah, very nice. Great.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. So just to be clear, what we just did, like I scanned a barcode, right? A QR code. And we hit this method, which is actually not on the note that, okay, the name of this file is capture auth response controller. This is on the API side of the QR code, right? And what ended up happening was it scanned the QR code and it provided this auth response, which we've seen this before. The only difference, there's no difference in this one actually, sorry. We see the challenge here. Again, this is probably really small, sorry, which is that GUID. We have the proof, which is the signature. We have the verification method, which has my DID and specifically the key we need to use. Now the difference here is we actually do need to make a web call to get that off, that DID document. So we're going to figure out the resolver, right? So when I say resolver, it's basically going to ask the question, are you a web method or are you a GitHub method? And in this particular, it's going to be a web method, right? Because I use the web one disk off. We have the DID document. So it downloaded the DID document from the internet. More specifically, right now we have the public key that we're going to use. So I didn't provide the public key. All I provided was the challenge and the signature and the DID itself. So I said, hey, I signed this response, right? Because it's in the proof. The way you know it's in the proof because it's literally the proof part of the payload, right? So it's like, here's my signature. Here's the verification method that you're going to use to verify this signature. And what you're specifically verifying is that I know it sounds weird that because like, who cares who you are at this point? But I may have history in your system, right? I may have loads of data. I may have made purchases. I may have like transactions of all kinds of types and have history of conversations and whatnot. But you gave me some challenge and I gave you my signature and my DID, right? So my signature and DID are related. And what we're going to do now is we're going to grab the public key out of the DID document using the verification method, right? And again, it's just key-1, but let's say they don't support the elliptic curve of Cardano, right? They use RSA. I may have RSA as another key in that DID document, let's say key-2, right? All right, moving on. Oh no, sorry. This is if I wait too long, it's gonna break. So this time we're just gonna let it run. But you get the point. The point I really wanted to show there was that we download the document and what we were literally looking at. So, oh gosh, gotta love debugging.
Q asks in the chat, is challenge synonymous with claim?
No, my DID will be a claim, and if challenge is more synonymous with nonce, so a one-time use token. But my claim, at least from like, let's say a web token or some type of access token, is more synonymous with nonce. So like if you've ever built like payment processors, right, and you don't really pass around somebody's credit card information, what you really pass around is a one-time token that represents the authority to use somebody's credit card information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For me,
or a better example might be when you reset a password, right? What they do is they create a nonce for your request, right? So it's like this request expires in 15 minutes type thing. Oh wait, I need to use the cam again.
I got you.
Right.
Using DID so globally, and that's not the right word, but when for me it muddies the language when it's really an identifier.
Yeah, I think that's the part. Like if you read any documentation on this stuff, they make it like it's almost like they just berate you with the same thing over and over and over. It's like DID stands for decentralized identifier. It's like, please understand this is an identifier, because people sometimes just say like, oh, it's identity. It's like, no, it's not.
You know what I mean? I've read it so many times. I still say that it stands for decentralized identifier network.
Yeah, when you combine it with method, that's definitely the way to go. That's definitely a good way to say it. Okay, let's do this quickly. All right, so I refreshed it. I got a new one. Okay, so it actually already did the part that we saw. This is back on the mobile device now. This is just the event method for when you scan. You can see right here, it's making that response that we captured earlier. And basically what ended up happening is when we made the call to the API, we provided the auth response. See, we're sending the auth response to the auth client. We got back a response from the API and basically saying that it's true. We're about to make this fail though. But we'll do that in a second. The point here is now that when we check the auth status, it's successfully authenticated. Now, cool. Again, but right down here we have a JWT that could be used as a web session on some DApp or some website. It doesn't even have to be a DApp, right? So if we go to here, we can see the expiration, the time, just a random, again, nonce type thing. But we can also see the unique name of a claim or role, or in the JWT, the payload is my did, right? Because this is representing me. So when I go onto your website and let's say you're social media, right? You're going to have posts, you're going to have comments, likes, follows, friends, people, that stuff related to that did, right? Like that did is who has the followers. That did is who has the posts. So when you go and when I want to go, like, let's say make a new post, you're going to use that did as the owner of that particular post. So that's how you know that I just signed in as them, because you were able to verify from my signature when you gave me that challenge and I signed it. I'm like, hey, I'm going to sign with my private key and I'm going to give you the did. Now, there's only one public key that can verify my private key, and it's on the did document that I'm not giving you, but I'm giving you the did on how you get that document, right? So I'm not telling you where to go. I'm just giving you the did, and you just need to know how to resolve it to get the public key in order to verify who I am. So what we'll do is we're going to make it fail this time. And by doing what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my click the right button, Kyle. Oh, sorry, my emulator is hiding. All right, so I'm going to refresh, get a new challenge. That's really what I'm doing here. You can see it changes every time. Check the auth, not authenticated. But let's make it fail. Oh. I'm going to go to my GitHub did, copy the document, go back here, replace it. Then we go to one disk off. This will look completely different. You can see it's a completely different identifier. I mean, this thing is going to just crap out, basically. Enter the password into my identity wallet that's acting as my identity provider because I own my identity. And we will authenticate again. Okay, this thing might even just, I don't even know if I have error handling, which doesn't look like I do because it just stopped right here. But yeah, so we can see like it just, I don't have error handling basically. So it got the document, which is now GitHub nothing alike. And it can't even find my public key, right? Because it's like, hey, that verification method is not there. All bad. And you can see that now it's false. So it's, we go back to the website, it's still not authenticated. So no JWT. And like, what did I just demonstrate? It's kind of like more of like what could be done during a middleman attack, or at least a middleman attempt, where somebody's trying to like intercept a request and kind of put their information in, but ultimately they can't sign the payload as me, even if you're doing some type of middleman attack, right? Because you don't have my key, so you just couldn't do it.
Is that directly related to the token handling or through a web page?
That would be done through, yeah, for instance, like this website would need some type of, it would either need to implement the ability to resolve DIDs, or it would just need to basically pay for some type of like DID resolution service, where it would basically, hey, here's a DID, give me the document, right? So in that case, right, if even though what I did was I changed the document, it would still get the document, and then it could basically verify if I provided the message and signature as well as the DID. It could do more. Okay, I don't know if I can turn my webcam back on because of this app. Nope. Okay, so yeah, what are questions we have? Hopefully, I was able to explain this at least well enough to at least put questions or waste a few hours of your life later when you're like, hey, I need these answers and I gotta figure it out.
All right. I'm curious. I'm curious to see what others thought of it. It's still unfortunately pretty opaque for me. Although it is wonderful to sort of see the inner machinations just of the development work, like how it goes in. I'm picking up a lot of like pretty valuable things. So not wasted time for sure. But it still fits into that I don't understand DIDs, and someday I will.
Yeah,
Um,
I think like if you've ever dealt with OAuth, which I mean everyone here has, but if you've built OAuth type integrations, like it might be a little clearer. Because like for instance, the way I envision this being really implemented is when somebody is sending you a response. So think about like when I scanned the barcode, a bunch of stuff just happened, right? But that's not what I would deem like the end result. What I would want to see on the next screen is the same thing where it's showing me who is asking for information, and it shows me the list of information that they're asking of me. And then I basically say allow or deny. But I see that on my side and not on some Google website that I was redirected to, right?
okay.
So the real powerful, like the reason why this is powerful is because it's taking all the things you kind of know today, but it's putting it more on your side. It's trying to put it behind a wall that you are in control of, right? Because there's nothing saying I have to be online to do any of this, right? I can scan something, and then what if I just cut the internet right there, right? Or even if the internet was already off and I was able to scan it, like there's nothing saying that my phone has to be connected, right? I could have a cold device signing information for me.
Okay.
Don't get me wrong, how you respond or deliver the payload past that whatever. But the point is that connectivity can also be severed.
Right. And right now, a lot of us don't take the time to sign transactions on an air-gapped machine, right? Even though if you're really looking for the highest level of security, that's the best way to do it. And so this is similar. And, maybe some other folks here can relate. I've certainly struggled to get friends and family to understand why they would want to work so much harder than they have to work to use their bank account in order to hold some tokens on a blockchain, right? We've all experienced that. This is taking it one step further. And there's, the different people are in different places on their journey of understanding how surveillance capitalism works and what are the costs and who benefits from that. And if you're far along on that journey, this feels really exciting. But a lot of people aren't yet. And it's an open question whether we will get to a critical mass of people even wanting this. But this is the pathway to it. Kyle, I'm really excited to build some full loops around this and to be able to to show a basic loop that illustrates this, and whether it's in a PPBL course or some other learning experience. We're getting there.
And I think right now it might be hard to understand like the advantages. I definitely think some people could maybe, thank you, could, whatever, let's just talk about let me just say what I'm trying to talk about. Like separating your wallet from your identity, right? I think a lot of people these days, they want to force somebody saying like, you are your wallet, you're this payment address. Like, I want to basically make you this, or like, even if it's something maybe a little bit better of like your state key.
Right.
But it's really hard.
In our Plutus PBL course, people essentially log in to the course because they have a token that's on chain. And we don't always want the holding of an on-chain token to be that method. It would be nice to be able to authenticate without requiring that.
Yeah, sorry. And I mean, and I guess like another thing to think about, sorry, this is a off topic, but the one other thing I like about the concept of identity wallet like this is think about your physical wallet and all the credentials you have in there. You know, let's say you do use mnemonics, right? Or let's say you don't even use mnemonics, it doesn't matter. There's no real difference between like losing your identity wallet and like using your physical wallet. And I mean that from a credential side, not necessarily from a key side, but that's kind of the beauty of being able to separate your keys from your credentials, because you could throw it all away and get new keys. Don't get me wrong, you gotta host another DID document somewhere, but ultimately you still have to like request or apply for the credential again in the physical sense, but you would just do the same exact thing for the digital sense. So when we talk about recovery, you could recover like the DIDs and the keys if you use mnemonics, but even that, like you're not really going to lose that much, or at least it's not any different than it is today in the physical sense of losing your credentials, like your driver's license. You still got to go replace it somewhere, right? Fill out the same form and prove who you are. Quasar, you got a question?
Well, yeah, I do. My question is, what questions do you have? How do you feel about what you're doing, and what's your next steps, and what would you like us to provide?
Okay, we'll start with the way I see this is, well, I'll just tell you what my next steps are. I think kind of this is right now very much a project where I am just passionate about the subject area. As to what I plan on doing with it, I'm not exactly sure yet. I'm definitely building. Basically the next steps of like, okay, cool, I just got a JWT to this website that doesn't have a backend, right? What I want to do is kind of build out the issuer side of things, because I think that's really the meat of like the next step. So let's say I logged in, and then from there, what I want to do is build out the issuer side. So you log in, and then you create your credentials, right? So I talk about like issuing people credentials and stuff. Well, there isn't like some definition out there where it's like, this is a credential, right? Like you have to define it, right? Like it's like,
yeah,
credential could mean anything. It
could
could
be
mean
email address.
Yeah, it could be something as simple as just your email address. Exactly. So depending on the organization, the company, the group, right? So let's say Gimbalabs wanted to create a credential for the PBL course, right? Let's say you finished it and you proved you finished it, right? They could issue a credential. But what that credential looks like, I don't know. Maybe it has the smart contract that was used at the time. Maybe it has the transaction in which it used to issue the token, stuff like that, right? But that's all custom. So it's like, now luckily I did a little bit of dev in the DAO world, so I have a little bit of experience creating schemas and how to define schemas. So from there, and luckily it's just the same stuff. It's like no different. It's just going on there and saying like, okay, I need this field. Is it required? Is it a number string like that? So when we talk about like schema, that's what we're really talking about. It's like, this is the object these are the properties in it. This is what we allow. This is maybe the validation of it. Is it required? Stuff like that. It's kind of like a contract is really might be a better way of saying that. And then from there, well, so schema definition, the ability to accept requests, and then the ability to issue the actual credential. And more importantly, the ability to revoke the credential, because that's also important. So
Revoke it from which parties or how, or all parties?
Yeah, so whoever I issue the credential to, I should be able to revoke it from them as well.
And that person should be able to revoke it as well. They should be able to return it.
And so that's, on the other side of the coin, if I give a credential to somebody, now most likely what's going to happen when you present credentials, they will have like expirations on them. So it's like the ability to like search for that credential again or whatever, or to resolve that credential will basically be timestamped. But yeah, you should also be able to just basically say no, you can't do that, or you can't look at it. Because remember, credentials are not stored on the chain. They're more or less, a lot of times you're not really going to even, that's a tricky one because it's but like think about credentials are definitely more like smarter than just like a piece of information. Because like for instance, you may get a credential that just says you're over 21. It doesn't actually have your birthday, right? It's be like over 21, true. That's the credential. So it's like, I don't want to give you my birthday. You just need to know if I can drink, right? Because I mean, like even today, right?
Yeah.
You go to a bar, you're flashing your driver's license. It has your name, your street address, like where you live, your birthday. It's like none of that is relevant.
Organ donor status.
Yeah,
like, come on, man.
Exactly. Do I wear contacts?
Yeah. Am I here for a guy, girl, or drink? Like all that stuff. Okay, awesome. Roar's been working on a pretty awesome identity solution. I love what he's doing. And if you've looked at the actual, the industry of the KYCs and the AMLs and anywhere from, a personal person, a business institution, and those scorecards is what we're calling it. If you're interested in any of that,
I mean, so I only know. So I've talked to the identity. Well, I've talked to one of the guys from Identity or from Block Trust. I know of Root, and then I know of IMAX. I think something like that. I'm definitely interested to know like what's out there, at least in the Cardano space. That there's plenty of non-Cardano space. I'm definitely, like I said, a lot of my focus right now is about to be on how issuers like create and issue their credentials. I think right now a lot of the work I see is more or less around the identity wallet side, more or less like holding this piece of information and like how to present it and stuff, but not really on the other sides. Because to me, there's three actors, which is multiple interactions. There's multiple ways of doing all this stuff. So I mean, even the sense of being a resolver, right? Providing like resolution type services, like that has nothing to do with identity, like wallets. So there's tons of opportunity in this space to provide services. So
is that where you're going? Is that what you're, are you looking to turn this into a business?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it would be, I mean, I definitely would like to, if I can build the products. And I think for me, more specifically, like I'm more interested in providing like B2B type solutions than B2C solutions. So, like I like like for instance, I talk about like being a consultant, right, and having credentials to work on certain things for companies that are hiring me to work on specific things. And it's like going through onboarding stuff. A lot of times, it's like you just kind of get like these open, non-expirational type of like access. Which don't get me wrong, what I just said is it's a lot easier said than done. But I think a lot of times it just comes down to it being like a centralized service makes it brittle, right? Like writing software, right? It's like saying like, oh, you know, you can write a monolith versus a microservice. And if you've ever written in either of these, like you kind of start understanding like why you might favor working in a microservice than a monolithic type of architecture, right? Because I can break something in a monolithic architecture that I wasn't even looking at, right? But if I'm working on a microservice, it's like its own, like there's many different moving parts. So if it's more modular like that, it's like I may break something here. Well, I can just turn this off, right? It's like, okay, that's unavailable. But guess what? You can still sign in, you can still look at stuff, you can still kind of look at history or even use the app. But maybe you can't, I don't know, send a message. Like maybe I messed up like the messaging protocol or something. It's like I didn't just take down the whole
It's
entire
a rug pull,
service.
y'all. He
So-
rugged the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's
So
all right. So then, here's a question and an experience, I guess. I feel like this is so fresh of a topic and so misunderstood and so are predefined by what people's idea of what a DID was or what KYC is or SSI. I feel like it's almost easier to talk about these things as non-humans, not talk about people, because it makes it so personal, interpersonal, and from your point of view, you're building this solution, issuing a credential to, you know, you're the issuer, the subject, and all of it. It's a really, you know, inception type experience to try to explain and pitch to people. You know, and even like building or coding it, it's like, okay, who am I? I'm the business that I've got a contract with this other business to get other businesses to send me requests that I send to them that I get a yes or no or, you know, approval for. So, yeah, it's easy to get lost.
Yeah, but I'm just going to pitch in here. But I have several use cases for the DIT, but I don't have money to hire a developer. So if you need a platform to test your solutions, I can also pitch you several ideas on because I have a long user story on how this DIT implementation should work for the users and the industry. So if you're up for it, we can have a chat later on. Just
yeah. Here. This is the best way to contact me.
I mean, I wish we could just do this with IdeaScale accounts, connect an IdeaScale account, a GitHub and a Twitter, you know, and just get KYC, you know, grassroots inside of, you know, our own little ecosystem. But
yeah.
Thanks, dude.
Yeah, but I'm saying it here, even though the Roots guy isn't there. I'll talk with him as well, I hope.
You know what, man? I'll reach back out to Rodolfo because we still got the KYC proposal open. And you know, he's awesome, dude. You know, him just throwing Sidetree into Cardano on a whim was pretty badass.
Yeah, my mind is going at the moment, if I can butt in, is so like you just said about know your customer, but this is kind of the other end of things as well. It's actually objects can know their owner. So you've got kind of proof of ownership built into all this. So if you've got any kind of transaction happening with a digital item, purchasing of ebooks, music, everything like that, then the ownership of that, you know, who financed that transaction can be signed into the, you know, watermarked into the digital file, and then anybody who then possesses that file in the future doesn't know the person who bought it, but just knows that if they ask somebody whether they owned it or not, they will only be able to prove they own it if they own it. If they owned it ever. So
yeah.
So it's like a digital rights management that is totally fragmented, decentralized, and immutable and eternal.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's I mean, there is definitely like some sense of a ledger that can be leveraged, but like, like this type of approach to things, it like leans so heavy just on the basics of cryptography, right? Like if a key pair can, like for instance, if a private key can only have one public key, right? Then it should be very easy for us to just verify that like you are the controller of like a did document, basically, right? Of a did. So, and screw it, not even a person, right? Like IoTs, it could be like, for instance, like a ebook. Let's say an ebook, right, lent out from a this is like a silly example, but like an ebook that you might have, and you have like some type of like library membership, right?
Mhm,
I don't have to
mhm.
return my books anymore. The book will just become unavailable once the expiration of my credential of checking some book out, which this is all kind of weird, but something like that, very simple, of just saying like, okay, your credential expired, you no longer have access to this book. Or hey, you have a credential to go stay at this Airbnb, or my real estate agent gave me access to some house for 2 hour period, right? Like after those 2 hours, I can't unlock the house, or I can't turn the car on.
It's your hotel key type deal, the card. That's all
So you
it
just
is.
take out all these like physical things that, like, hey, I lost a key. It's like, if you lose your phone, you getting in your hotel might not be your number one priority. So.
Yeah, I love the idea of being able to, like, you're loaning out books and never seeing them again is is definitely something that happens regularly. So you can go around scanning your friends' files, say, "Look, I own this. I bought it, not you. Give it back." And yeah, libraries will fall over themselves for that.
Yeah, and it's like, I definitely think that's where like blockchain, like for instance, like if you read like material on this stuff, you're gonna see that like blockchain it's not necessarily like an optional thing. Like there's a reason why a permanent ledger is important. And so blockchain really very much is a huge like component to the digital identity world. Not so much to define your identity, but more or less to one, like have a very immutable way of storing your did document, right? I may lose, let's say I don't like, let's say something really silly like, hey, I forgot to renew my domain, or I had an expired card on my domain, and then my did document is no longer available. Something like that, right? Or hey, Microsoft, they messed up again and GitHub is now down. That happened not that long ago. I'm literally like sitting on a client call and I'm just like, guys, is anyone else having problems with GitHub? You're like, oh my God, it's down. Like you never see that before, but like, well, Microsoft is now in control. So it's very possible. But yeah, so it's like, there are definitely non-blockchain ways of doing this. And I mean, and they're not bad. But you can definitely start seeing like real power when like blockchain is involved.
Yeah, I was thinking about like provenance of ownership of stuff as well. So you
Yeah,
can
and
have stuff.
yeah, and I like the I like the idea of bringing together the two worlds, right? Because one is open, public, very visible, but immutable. The other one is actually a little more secretive, right? Like if I think about the identity wall, like to me, it's actually it's almost like this secret box where I get to put stuff, right? And I only get to share it out when and how I see fit. Like the credentials, right? The credentials are not stored on anything. So it's like having both worlds like available to you. That's where I definitely think that's powerful. So it's like you kind of get both, like where I need to prove things, or like, hey, I don't need to prove anything to you.
Like the big Banksy reveal when he comes to his dying day on his deathbed.
Yeah.
Says, see, I could prove I did this and this and this and this because nobody knew in the meantime.
1 second. I'll put this with my other tabs. So, okay, so this is actually really, so right now, this is kind of like something that I've been looking at, because I think it's really interesting how, so Hyper, it's purely a service for that uses like DIDs as just pure authentication. I don't think they call it like digital or decentralized identity. They might somewhere, but when I was reading their like into like more of the developer side of things, you can tell what like it is actually more decentralized than it looks. And there's definitely other projects out there. If you've been in the crypto space for a while, you'll recognize some of the names, like Civic. That's like an older one, like their identity. But yeah, and the other thing about this stuff too is like the more you read in the W3C world, like eventually you'll come across pages where it just says like unofficial, like right on it. So it's like, you know how like early this stuff really is. They're just like, okay. And then this is probably one of my favorite solutions at the moment, actually, just because they just have so much documentation on like how it works that it's hard to like ignore it, I guess. So Microsoft Entra is the decentralized we'll call it decentralized identity for like the like Active Directory stuff, right? So if you worked in an organization that uses Active Directory, that might make sense. But if you, and you might even have like use the Windows Authenticator if you have like an Outlook or Office 365 email, and you use their authenticator. On that authenticator, there's a part that says verified ID, and it's for like decentralized credentials. Verified, they just call it verified ID. But the reason why I look at this is because they have like the whole notion of like creating schemas and issuing schemas and like how to write rules around them and stuff like that. So, and there's other companies that kind of do the same thing. Affinity, Matter. So there are definitely solutions out there for this type of stuff. But I think it goes back to what Matthias has basically implanted a virus in my head. Who pays for all this stuff? And that's like the one thing I can't get around. Which I don't think.
Well, you're doing B2B.
I don't think the user. So, well, yeah, that's easy. That's right. The easy solution. Yeah.
Often. Yeah.
If we're talking users on like us, like, you know, Cardano community, man, I mean, why not be building it into stake pools and battle fees and, you know,
yeah,
find the capital that's obviously just leaking out of the system somewhere, because we're not capturing all of it. I think that's a good,
yeah.
it's a good, man.
So this is, I mean, even something along the lines of, you know, if it's like more of a Cardano type of system, right? It could be something that like Dandelion, some type of like DID resolution service that like Dandelion hosts, right? Or something along those lines. And then to me, it's just like the whole notion of like, okay, you know, you run a node, you get paid type of thing.
Let's do it, man.
I mean, and from the issuer standpoint, that could be something as simple as like, well, you just pay for the schema to get stored on chain, right? But, and you, yeah, when it comes to services though, I mean, like you can't really get away from paying for the resolution, I don't think, especially if it's an on-chain solution. But I mean, Blockfrost has, I mean, it's nothing different than that, right? It's that the only difference is I'm not giving you an open API to everything Cardano. It's just, it's a very narrow
Yeah.
niche type product, but it does the same thing. It accesses the chain, and you're just paying for the fact that there's infrastructure.
It might be a generation before our brains are sufficiently rewired for these models too, right? So it's a little bit at a
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, for sure.
Give me that free.
If you look at the European SSI stuff, that link that I shared there, man, I think it gives you a chance to like see the whole network, the identifier network, and how it operates. That honestly, we're already doing all this stuff. We just, our brain just hasn't registered that this is actually what's going on. That model, they've been very helpful to me. Just seeing how I can be an actor or a party, part of an organization or organizations, and do actions, you know, and actually track it all and see where it went, or you know, it's, dude, honestly, it's the governance key in my mind. If you can really look at that and see, and plus we don't know, you know, if we're talking about ourselves as a person, as Quasar, you know, am I part of ADAL, Summon, Gimbalabs, you know, what organization, who am I when I'm here? Tricky shit.
Yep.
Today I'm the gardener.
Yeah, and so like with that idea though too, right? It's like you could have one DID hold all those credentials, right?
Mhm.
But it also goes back to something I said in the beginning, is the concept of like one DID per like unique thing. But it's because right, another thing you could do is if you just think of a DID as one set of key pairs or one password, like that also can help facilitate that, right? So it's like you could absolutely use one email for a lot of things, but like depending on, like, let's say you go to like a professional event, like are you giving out your personal email or are you giving out like your work email, right? Like
Here's my
so,
business card.
exactly. So like everyone has multiple personas that they kind of like put on. But yeah.
Yeah, and again, going back to the ownership of stuff as well, is that you don't necessarily want to prove ownership of something forever. So if you bought a right-wing book in your youth, yeah, you know, as a middle-aged man, you might not be so proud of the fact. No one can say otherwise, but if you need to prove that you own it, you still can.
Yeah. Not exactly related to what you said, but what you said made me realize is another thing with DIDs that I really like is that it allows for key rotation, right? So the DID itself, it needs to be permanent, like it can never change, because ultimately you're talking about how you resolve the document, but the document can always be updated, right? So you could have your own policy, or maybe the identity wallet enforces it, where like every 3 months it generates a new key pair that represents or signs on behalf of that DID, and you basically, you know, restore or update the DID document, because ultimately it doesn't matter, right? Like nobody should be retaining the DID document, just the DID, because what's behind the DID document itself, right, that could be updated. So
Yeah, so one of my use cases for this this ownership, for example, of a native wallet is inheritance. This is something you probably could charge for if you add. So if a user doesn't log in to a certain site, that native wallet in that site will then be inherited to the person they set. So after 5 or 10 years, so they will get the crypto in the wallet.
yeah. So now
Just
I don't
an
know.
example. Yeah, but just an example. I have more. No.
So we'll probably have to do this again in a couple months as ideas continue to refine. It'd be good to revisit this topic on a regular basis.
Yeah, but I'm very for Atala Prism, but I'm not sure how far they progressed, or how is this related to this meeting session? And is it Roots that's all in, and
and that's the thing too, right?
Because it seems they come a lot longer than Prism, so.
Yeah, I would, and that's the thing, right? Like anybody can, because I was just talking to one of the guys from Block Trust. I keep wanting to call them Block Identity, Block Trust, right? So, and they're just going to write a browser extension wallet, identity wallet that will support Atala Prism. But there's nothing saying like somebody could come out. I mean, even the Roots guys, right? They could put out an identity wallet that supports, Cardano sidechain, Prism, and then any other. Like maybe I come up with some random like spec for Cardano, and they could support that as well. So it's like the identity wallet isn't tied to Prism type of thing.
Or a chain specifically at this point. I mean,
yeah. And that's the thing, like an identity wallet could have like multi-chain type of support.
I'm more worried about my use cases, and if it's supported, if I run it on any other thing other than since we're running a full Cardano node in the back end, we should support Atala Prism as a function.
Yeah,
but that could just be one, right? Because I think the important part is that the identity wallet and the Cardano wallet are separate things. Like they
are now, yes, but
they should always be like you. Well, so like for instance, you may tie a Cardano address to like a DID, but the DID doesn't have to do anything. Like for instance, somebody could come on and say like, well, my DID is Ion, so it's technically stored on Bitcoin, but I have a Cardano address and I'd like to use your DApp, right? And it's like, but I want to use this identity, right? Like you're like, you don't care. Like the way you resolve the identity has nothing to do with Cardano, even if it was Cardano, right? Because what you really care about is more like, let's say maybe their staking keys, or like the ways that they can actually own tokens. Like let's say it's like an NFT or some type of fungible token that they have to own. Like that's that's different. So
we need,
and I think that's the important part, right? It's like you want the interoperability, because then it's
we just need to eliminate black boxes too, right? For if Atala Prism is understood for what it is, and people understand how to build interoperable alternatives, that's the whole promise of edge computing, right? We don't have to wait for the monolithic solution, but we can grab the parts we need and we can make them work together. And every time, we did the same thing as a developer community when we were waiting on the Plutus application backend, the PAB. When really, if we had just looked under the hood at what the desired functionality of the PAB was, we would have realized we were all just building it as we went anyway, right? And so that, to me, it's not about yes or no to Atala Prism. It's just, okay, where does that fit in the stack? Can I use it? Sure. But do I understand well enough what it's doing to be able to, at the least, assess alternatives, but in the best case scenario, just make tools that work together to achieve what I'm trying to do.
And all this kind of reminds me of something that Roberto sent me. There is something called the Universal Resolver, which I believe is also the creator of the DNS DID method. Basically, it's like this library that has a bunch of methods that it just resolves. Yeah. So it's like, you could just have that a part of your code base, and it's like you're like, give me a DID. It could be a key DID that has like the document is delivered. I mean, yeah. Like that's when things are really powerful. It's like you don't, it's almost like having like OAuth, but then it's like I do every provider. And it's like you just choose what you want to sign in with because your identity is how you choose.
I got to jump off in a sec. Q, you want to take us home?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, man. Thanks for the honor here. Talking about taking us home. Atala Prism brought me home. It brought me here to Cardano. It's what I fell in love with. The first time that I heard it was the Shelley Summit. I think that was June 19th of 2020, maybe. And minute 19 of that video, I heard the Null or whoever the speaker was say, "Hey, now you got this identity, you go get insurance." And I'm like, okay, that's cool, but that's so not right. Not how the real world works. So me being who I am, I'm like, hey, Null, my name's Derek. I sell insurance, blah, blah, blah. I'd like to talk to you about Atala Prism. And from there to here, it was looked at as an institutional platform, the flagship product of Cardano, to now being grassroots platform solution that may or may never come home as we thought that it would. Will it ever be this huge monolith solution? Hopefully not, but hopefully it will fulfill everyone's desires and what they thought. But it really blew me away. I loved it, and I did not think I would get into decentralized identity at all. And I've always combated the self-sovereign identity as well. But man, thank God for James and for other people that have actually allowed me the time to discover the meaning of sovereignty as I understand it now. These identity wallets, totally different. Our whole understanding of crypto, blockchain, security, days how it's changed so much, so fast. And, with people to be able to just continuously work with, improve, and build, and meet at the carnival and have work to do. Yeah, man, my phone's overheating, so I'll take you home with that one. And speaking of that, if my phone's not breaking, I'm finally moving out of this mold infested house. So 5 fucking straight days, pardon the language, of loading and unloading. Oh man, such a huge weight off of my shoulders.
Good. Congrats. That's good news.
Yeah, I live 8 doors down, so you'll walk to the new place. So, Kyle, thank you very much.
Great,
Yeah,
Kyle.
Thanks for the meeting.
This is one for the books. I'll rewatch it in 6 months too and probably understand things a little better. It'll be a good test.
I'm going to share it with my company so they'll get a little exposed to the Gimbalabs world.
Awesome. For anybody else checking out this recording later, we do this every week on Tuesdays. We talk about a different thing. Next week, we got something else going on. I can't remember what it is right now, but there's a calendar on the Gimbalabs website and a variety of different sessions coming up. We do live coding on Wednesdays and Thursdays as well if you want to learn Cardano development. So look us up. Have a good one, everybody.